So, the BT-42, as it was in the video, is a Finnish assault gun made from 1942 to 1944. This tank was made with a BT-7 hull and a new turret design that was used to fit its monstrous 114mm howitzer. In this video, we're going to be taking a closer look at the BT-42 and what it primarily did / also failed at in its lifespan. Now, the BT-42 is an interesting tank. Its main armament, a 114mm howitzer, encased right here and right there. It weighed 15 tons and had a crew of 3. I believe a gunner / loader, a commander, and a driver. Now, this tank had 6 to 16mm armor, but its hull was built off of a light tank, and it primarily had a very not well armored turret. This tank used Christie suspension, just like the BT-7 and BT-5, and its max speed was 33 miles per hour, a bit slightly impacted due to extra weight from the bigger turret, which we'll talk about later. And only around 18 units were ever built, with only one of them remaining intact from World War II. Weirdly enough, it's still drivable, and you can see that from the video. Now, this is a bit of a diagram showing the BT-42. This is from this side and that side, and front and back. The BT-42's most famous entry, and practically why anyone knows about it, is when it was featured in an anime called Girls und Panzer. Here it is right here. That's what it looked like. I don't know. I think it's like knockoff Finland, whatever. But, yeah. That's how it was famous. It was in the film and the finale. Now, the BT-42 is quite an interesting tank. We're going to dive into where it first debuted in 1943, where the BT-42 was used to knock out pillboxes, bunkers, and machine gun nests. And against soft pillboxes and machine gun nests, this tank was useful. But against heavily armored bunkers and other tanks, this tank failed at. In fact, this tank had no tank-on-tank combat anything. It wasn't meant for fighting other tanks, and its gun was not good at penetrating the much more heavily armored Soviet vehicles. Now, aside from the tank looking like that, there are some pros and some cons. Let's start with the pros first, so that the good stuff happens first and the bad stuff happens later. And the first pro is that it could actually drive on its road wheels. Yes, the BT-7, BT-5 had a feature where if the tracks got knocked off, they could still drive on their road wheels, which not a lot of other tanks could do. Which is quite interesting if you think about it, because you would just have a tank driving on wheels instead of on tracks, which just feels illegal in tank fighting cases. But yeah, that was a feature that this tank could do, and it's quite interesting. Very interesting. And really, other than the pros, other than it having a big gun and, it being a Finnish tank with Christie suspension and being able to drive on its wheels, there's not many other pros. With cons, however, we have a good amount of them. For starters, the weight. The weight caused a lot of problems. Not only did it make the tank slower, but because of this, the tank suffered from wheel suspension stressing problems, as well as engine stressing problems. Now, this really is not good at all, because, well, you kind of need an engine, and you kind of need suspension. You're gonna need those when you're fighting in tanks. So because of that, those two problems were pretty big. Another problem, all this weight, by the way, counteracted to its much larger and much bigger turret. Now, the biggest problem with this, and practically the biggest elephant in the room, was its bigger turret. Because of the bigger turret, it was basically a lot of people could see it. It was more you could see it a lot better. It was a much bigger target. So therefore it wasn't the bigger turret had a lot of problems. In some instances, too, when the BT-42 would come across heavily armored tanks, in our case for this story, an IS-2, Soviet Goliath, in one instance, a BT-42 got into a fight with a IS-2 and shot at the IS-2 18 times, but failed to even immobilize it due to the tank breaking down and having the gun not penetrating it. Eventually, the tank was destroyed, obviously. Now, by 1944, Germany was sending over emergency Panzer IVs as well as emergency Stug 3s. Now, the Panzer IV would just be used as like a battle tank, but the Stug 3 would take on the role of the BT-42 and would ultimately be replaced as factories as well as these tanks, as these conversions really weren't being made in 1944 and their production was completely retired by then. And they were retired and replaced with the Stug 3. Now it's time for our conclusion. What I think of the tank and what are my thoughts on it. Now, in my eyes, the BT-42, if it had better numbers and, in all honesty, better armor, it maybe could have put a bit of a difference against the Red Army. But as we learned from Germany in 1945, if you only make 18 of something, if you make below 1,000 of something, you're probably not going to do well with that vehicle. Now, if you make 18 of them, they're probably not going to make a big difference, and this one really did not. And ultimately, because of this bad reputation that the vehicle had for its crew and overall for the Finnish army, it has oftentimes been forgotten or left out of history books and is ultimately just passed off by much more iconic tanks like the Tiger, the T-34, the Sherman, or other vehicles. Now, it doesn't mean that it's certainly an interesting vehicle. It has some interesting things with it, like the ability to drive on road wheels and all sorts of other stuff. But just because of all of its cons and everything else, I don't think it really made a difference, and it didn't. But our program's not over yet because we have a special announcement coming up next. Are you tired of new modern videos clogging up your YouTube homepage? Are you tired of new flashy videos with all sorts of stuff that you just don't like? Do you want more classic, more retro, more 60s? Well, in our case today, we have the perfect thing. Figs ETC, a longtime subscriber and friend of mine, is being sponsored. Not really. Well, he's not really paying me, but I'm shouting him out for today's video. Now, if you want nostalgic wrestling, music, movie content, we've got your back. 50s, 80s enthusiasts, even Al Jolson, like the 20s, everything onwards, it's all in there. Now, what do they have to offer? Well, they have a bar of delights. You've got things like All Year Round Classic, The Holiday Inn Story, Holiday Inn, banger Christmas movie. Do you want to hear about the unnecessary controversies of Al Jolson? Maybe you want to hear about the forgotten treasure of Louis Prima. Maybe even Ocean's 11, banger movie in my opinion, the original one though. Do you want to know what this new AI thing thinks about Seinfeld? Or maybe you want to hear about what killed Bing Crosby's cover of Hey Jude. Or maybe you want to hear about some wrestling. Figure bios, setups, everything is in there when it comes to wrestling. Now, with all this old-fashioned stuff, a lot of people are going to love it. So hey, some older fans out there who watch my history videos, I recommend also watching these videos as well. That will do it for today's video. I hope you have a nice day, and I hope you have a lovely weekend and a lovely Christmas. That's going to do it for today, and have a nice day.